I wish I could say this story started with fireworks or some dramatic family blow-up, but honestly, it started with a cherry tomato plant. My name's Ben, I'm 34, and my wife Claire and I live in a quiet, leafy suburb just outside a mid-sized city. We bought our house 7 years ago after scraping together every penny we had and borrowing more than we were comfortable with. But it was worth it. The place had a cozy 2-story brick home, a big wraparound porch Claire instantly fell in love with, and a spacious backyard with a gentle slope that led into what I always called our mini orchard, a row of 3 old apple trees and a patch we turned into a little vegetable garden. That garden was Claire's pride and joy. She could spend hours there, kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life out of the soil like it was some sort of magic. Tomatoes, basil, squash, cucumbers, you name it. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples who'd lived here for decades. Everyone waved when they passed, lent tools, watched each other's pets. It was the kind of place where people brought you banana bread when you moved in. At least, that's how it was until Linda moved in next door. Linda was, to put it gently, not a banana bread type of neighbor. She bought the house next to ours about a year ago, after the previous owners downsized. She was maybe in her early 50s, had that perfectly stiff hair that didn't move when the wind blew, and wore sunglasses even on cloudy days. The first time we met, she barely looked up from her phone when I introduced myself. Just a tight smile and a distracted Claire baked her brownies and brought them over in a nice tin. Linda didn't even open the door all the way, just reached out, took them with 2 fingers like they might be radioactive, and shut the door. Claire stood there blinking for a second like she'd just been slapped with a paper towel. Still, we tried. We always try. Because being good neighbors used to mean something. Things were quiet for a few months. Linda kept to herself. We kept to ourselves. But we started to notice little things. She'd walk her dog, some tiny, yappy thing with a pink sweater, right along the edge of our lawn, sometimes letting it wander in and leave little gifts behind. Claire asked her once, very politely, to clean it up. Linda just said, "Oh, it's probably from a squirrel," and walked off. Then came the hedge trimming incident. I had taken the weekend to clean up our backyard, shaping the hedges along the side that bordered Linda's property. They were technically ours, planted well within the fence line, and I trimmed them meticulously. That Monday, I came home to find them butchered. I mean, hacked down unevenly like someone took a weed whacker to them blindfolded. When I asked Linda about it, she shrugged and said they were overhanging too much, and she was just protecting her space. I pointed out they were well within our property line, but she just smiled and said, "Oh, lines can be tricky." That phrase stuck with me. Lines can be tricky. The next week, we found a white plastic stake in our garden. One of those little boundary markers, jammed right through Claire's cherry tomato patch. I assumed it was a mistake, maybe left by a surveyor. But when I pulled it up, another one appeared the next day. Then another. They kept creeping inward, slowly, over the course of a few weeks, until about 6 feet of our garden had these little plastic markers poking up like weeds. It felt like some passive-aggressive board game, and we were losing. I confronted her. I shouldn't have gone alone, but I was too angry to think straight. "Hey, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Do you know anything about the stakes in our yard?" She was watering a potted plant on her porch, one of those fussy ornamental ones that didn't seem to grow. She didn't even turn around. Just said, "I'm just marking what's technically mine." "Technically yours?" I blinked. "Linda, the property line is clearly marked. It's been the same for decades. We have the original survey." She turned then, slowly, like a villain in a movie. "Surveys can be wrong. Old ones, especially. I had a guy come out. Said the line cuts through that weird little slope of yours. It's common in neighborhoods like this. Poor planning." I stared at her. "You can't just claim our garden. That land is ours." She smiled, tight, smug, knowing. Good luck proving anything. I went inside shaking. Not just with anger, but confusion. What was this? Was she bluffing? Was there some kind of law that let her do this? Claire was already looking through the drawer with all our house papers, digging out the survey we got when we bought the place. The line was clear, straight as an arrow, running a good 8 feet on our side of where Linda claimed it did. We thought that would be the end of it. But then we came home 2 days later to the sound of hammering. And that's when we saw it. A fence. A brand new, waist-high wooden fence being built, right through the middle of our backyard. Not on the edge. Not between our properties. Through our backyard. Through the tomato patch. through the marigolds. Claire screamed when she saw one of the workers casually toss her little decorative gnome aside like it was trash. I marched over, furious, and demanded they stop. The guy shrugged and said, "We were told this was part of her property now." She showed us a new survey. I knocked on Linda's door so hard I thought it might splinter. She opened it, all calm and collected, sipping from a mug that said #BossBabe. When I told her she was trespassing and damaging our property, she just said, "Take it up with the county. I already filed everything." Then she closed the door in my face. That night, Claire sat on the back steps and cried. She looked at the broken garden beds, the scattered mulch, the tomato cages lying on their sides like little metal skeletons, and she cried. And I sat next to her, feeling completely powerless. We were just two regular people, up against someone who seemed to know how to play the system, or at least act like she did. But that's when something shifted in me. Because while I may not have known every legal detail, I did know one thing. Claire and I had done everything by the book when we bought this house. Every signature, every permit, every boundary. And Linda? Linda had made one big mistake. She assumed we'd just roll over. She had no idea who she was messing with. And that's when I made the call that changed everything. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the original property documents while Claire lay curled up on the couch under a blanket, her face blotchy from crying. I'd never seen her so heartbroken over something like this. I mean, sure, we'd had hard times before, financial stress, work issues, even a rough patch in our marriage, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a patch of land. It was hers. That garden had gotten her through 2 miscarriages, through job layoffs, through her mother's death. She told me once that planting seeds made her feel like she still had control over something in the world. And Linda had just ripped it out of the ground like it meant nothing. The next morning, I took the day off work and drove straight to the county office. I don't even know what I was expecting. Maybe that I could walk in with the survey and someone would say, "Oh, no problem, sir. We'll take care of that awful woman right away." But of course, real life isn't that simple. After waiting an hour in a cramped lobby filled with people shouting about parking tickets and zoning issues, I finally got to speak with someone from the Land Records Department. I laid out everything. Our survey, the fence, the garden, Linda's smug little comment about good luck proving anything. The clerk, a thin guy in his late 30s who looked like he hated confrontation, adjusted his glasses and said, "Well, her survey was done within the last 6 months. It supersedes the older one on record. That doesn't mean she's right. It just means it's the most recent claim." I stared at him. "So what does that mean? She gets to take our land just because she filed first?" "No," he said quickly. "No. But it does mean that until someone contests it legally, the county can't intervene. You need to get your own updated survey and possibly take the matter to civil court. It's not uncommon in older neighborhoods. Boundaries shift over time. Sometimes fences were installed wrong decades ago, and people just lived with it. It's messy. Messy." That's all he had to say about the fact that a woman had chopped our backyard in half like she was slicing a birthday cake. I drove home with a knot in my stomach. Claire met me at the door, hopeful, and when I told her what the clerk said, she just nodded silently and went back to watering the half-destroyed basil plants that had somehow survived the construction chaos. The fence was done by then. It wasn't even straight. Just a jagged row of boards, clearly rushed, but standing firm like a middle finger planted right in the soil. That weekend, I paid out of pocket for a new private survey. The guy came with his equipment, measured everything carefully, and after 2 hours, handed me a folder. "Your original line's correct," he said. "No question. That fence cuts about 6.5 feet into your property. She's got no claim to it." Finally, some confirmation. I asked him if he could file it with the county, but he told me I'd have to do that myself, along with possibly filing a formal dispute or court claim to have the fence removed. That's when it hit me. We were going to have to fight this. Legally, financially, emotionally, and Linda knew it. The next few weeks were torture. Linda started acting like the fence had always been there. She redecorated our side, planting little shrubs, placing a plastic flamingo, even stringing solar lights along the top rail. She had the audacity to call the cops one evening when Claire leaned over to water one of the tomato plants that had started regrowing under the fence. Said we were tampering with her property. The officer was polite, but clearly uncomfortable. "Look, you guys need to settle this in court. I'm not a land dispute judge. Just try to avoid each other. Avoid each other? We shared a property line, and now a fence right through our backyard. You couldn't design a worse tension cooker. Claire started staying indoors more. She stopped tending to the rest of the garden, even though the other side was still intact. It just reminds me of what she took, she whispered one night, staring at her untouched gloves by the door. It killed me. Every time I looked at that fence, I didn't just see a line of wood. I saw what it was doing to her. To us. One day I came home and found her kneeling beside the fence, just sitting there, staring at a cluster of wilted marigolds. She looked so small, so defeated. That night, after dinner, she asked, "Do you ever wish we'd bought somewhere else?" It was like a punch to the gut. We had built our whole life around this house, and now it felt like a prison. But things weren't done getting worse. About a month after the fence went up, I was mowing the lawn, what was left of it, when Linda approached me from her driveway. She had a stack of papers in one hand and that same stupid mug in the other. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, all chipper. "I'm building a gazebo." I turned off the mower, wiping sweat from my face. "A gazebo? Where?" She smiled. "Oh, on my new part of the yard. Right where that little slope is. It'll be great for entertaining." I stared at her. "You mean the part you illegally claimed?" She shrugged. "Well, I see it differently. And apparently the county does too, since no one's stopping me." That night, Claire and I sat in the living room staring at the survey papers, the complaint forms, the fence photos. We were up against a wall, literally and legally. Filing a civil suit could take months, maybe years. We didn't have the cash to burn on lawyers. And if she did build a gazebo on our property, that would complicate everything. That's when the idea came to me. I started reading, researching. I stayed up late every night going through land records, county policies, encroachment cases, precedent rulings. I found a legal aid group that helped homeowners facing boundary disputes. And I found something Linda had overlooked. A tiny, boring detail. When she filed her updated survey, she failed to notify the County Planning Commission. Not just that, she also ignored the mandatory 30-day waiting period before beginning construction on any permanent structure involving a boundary change. And the kicker? There was a record of a warning letter sent to her mailbox. One she signed for, one she ignored. That was the moment the tide started to turn, even if Linda didn't know it yet. But before I could act on it, the betrayal happened. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It wasn't just about the garden or a gazebo. It was about the fact that someone we trusted, someone who had known us for years, chose her side. Claire's sister, Jenna. Now, Jenna was always a little impressionable. She worked in real estate, flitted from one office to another, always chasing some hot new opportunity. She'd visited our house dozens of times over the years, watched our dog when we traveled, helped Claire plant the very first squash patch. She knew our yard, knew the line. She'd laughed over margaritas with us on the porch swing just last summer. But apparently Linda had been chatting with her, offering her coffee when Jenna parked down the street to visit, sharing her side of the story. And now? Now Jenna had filed an affidavit in support of Linda's claim. Claire found out when she was prepping our documentation for the legal aid group. The affidavit was publicly filed as part of Linda's permit expansion request. Jenna had written that she distinctly remembered the previous owner saying the slope was technically part of both yards, and the fence was always meant to be temporary. A total lie. Claire stared at the screen for a long time. Then she quietly closed the laptop and walked out of the room. I found her crying in the laundry room 10 minutes later. "She was there," she said. "She helped me plant the lavender. She knows." It felt like we'd been stabbed in the back. I called Jenna the next morning. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just asked why. She hemmed and hawed, then finally admitted Linda had offered her some freelance staging work if she helped clarify the boundary issue. "Ben, it's not personal," she said. "It's just paperwork. Everyone wins. She gets her gazebo, you get peace." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That was the breaking point. That was when I knew, for Claire, for our home, for everything we had built, I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to bury Linda's smug little fence in legal fire. And she had no idea what was coming. Rock bottom didn't come with a bang. It came quietly. It crept in like fog, settling into the corners of our life until we couldn't see past it. After Jenna's betrayal, Claire barely spoke to her. They had been close, talking daily, sometimes texting each other nonsense late into the night like teenagers. But now, Claire's phone would light up with her sister's name, and she'd just flip it over, letting it ring out. Sometimes she'd stare at it for a few seconds longer than she wanted to, like she was waiting for an apology that wasn't coming. And it never did. Linda, on the other hand, was in full victory parade mode. She hosted barbecues on her new slice of our yard, complete with fairy lights and pop music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker. Her plastic flamingo collection expanded. She invited guests over, always when Claire and I were outside, loudly proclaiming how she'd finally cleaned up the neighborhood eyesore. One afternoon, I caught one of her guests using our tomato cage as a footrest. We felt erased in our own home. The final blow came on a Thursday morning. I was dragging the trash cans out to the curb when I noticed a small yellow sign had been planted near the fence. It was laminated and read, "Future site of the Willowview Garden Gazebo, permitted," with a QR code linking to the public filing. She was really doing it. Claire and I sat on the porch that night and said nothing. I think we both knew what we were thinking, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Maybe we should move. It felt like giving up. Like waving a white flag on the lawn we'd once dreamed about growing old on. But after everything, after the legal limbo, the sleepless nights, the silent meals, it felt like the only option left that wouldn't break us completely. We weren't just losing land. We were losing each other. And that's what finally broke me. That night, after Claire went to bed, I sat in the living room staring at the county documents I'd printed weeks ago. I ran my fingers along the warning letter Linda had ignored, the one she'd signed for. The one that clearly outlined that any structure built during the 30-day review period was in violation of Municipal Code Section 12.16.070b. I pulled out a notepad and started writing. For the next few weeks, I became a ghost. Not in the spooky way, just invisible. I stopped reacting to Linda's provocations. I stopped bringing up the fence. I stopped fighting with Claire about next steps. And instead, I started documenting everything. Every time Linda had a contractor on our property, I took photos. Every package she signed for, I cross-referenced it with construction supply receipts. I combed through the online permitting portal every morning before work, noting every status change. I spoke with the land records office again, this time not as a frustrated homeowner, but as a guy who had learned the system. I asked real questions, took real notes, learned about conditional use permits, variances, and the appeal process for wrongful encroachments. And I filed a formal complaint, not just about the fence, but about how she built it and when. I cited the code violations by number. I attached the signed warning letter. But the thing that really turned things around? An old man named George. George was the previous owner of Linda's house. I found him on a hunch, using property transfer records. He was in his 70s now, living in a smaller place a few towns over. I called him, introduced myself, and explained the situation. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he sighed and said, "That slope's not hers." Never was. I had it surveyed before I sold. Even planted those apple trees to mark the line. He agreed to send me a signed affidavit and a scanned copy of his survey. I thanked him a dozen times. When I told Claire about it, I swear I saw the first real smile on her face in weeks. That was the beginning of the rise. But it didn't come easily. One morning, we woke up to find the rest of the garden torn up. Not just trampled, destroyed. Stakes pulled up. Planters cracked. Tomato vines yanked from the soil and left in a pile like yard waste. I ran outside, heart pounding, but of course Linda wasn't out there. Just her dog, barking from her deck. I called the police. Not 911, just the non-emergency line. An officer came out, looked around, and said there wasn't much they could do without video evidence. "Might have been animals," he muttered, scribbling notes. Claire walked back inside before he finished speaking. Later that night, she told me, "I feel like I'm disappearing in my own house." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just held her. We were both tired. But tired doesn't mean done. I installed a camera under the eave facing the garden. Motion activated. High resolution. No one knew it was there. 2 nights later, it caught Linda sneaking into our yard with a pair of garden shears. She clipped 2 small rose bushes down to the roots. Bushes that were clearly on our side of the fence. I downloaded the footage, time-stamped, and everything. I sent it, along with a formal complaint, to the county legal office, the planning department, and our HOA. I didn't tell Linda. Let her keep smiling. I was also building something else, quietly, carefully. I found a land use attorney through the legal aid group. Young guy named Marcus, smart as hell, passionate about property rights. He agreed to help us file an injunction against any new construction pending resolution of the boundary dispute. It was an uphill battle, but we had documentation now. Witnesses, surveys, video proof. We also started reconnecting as a couple. I think it was the shared sense of purpose. We went to the county office together one day, dropping off forms and grabbing coffee afterward. We laughed. Not much, but enough. Claire even started tending the far side of the garden again. She replanted some of the basil. It wasn't the same, but it was something. She also started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Set up an easel in the garage. Said it helped her feel like she could still create beauty, even if our yard looked like a war zone. Things weren't perfect. The fence was still there. The damage had been done. But for the first time in months, we weren't just reacting. We were acting. Then came the county hearing notice. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The Planning Commission had received our formal complaint and scheduled a hearing to determine whether Linda's permit would be revoked due to multiple procedural violations, including failure to honor the 30-day notice period, destruction of shared property, and encroachment without proper boundary verification. It was happening. The date was set for 6 weeks out. In that time, Linda seemed to sense something was shifting. She got quieter, less smug, no more barbecues. The solar lights disappeared one night. She stopped waving at cars and started watching us from behind her curtains. One afternoon, I caught her trying to measure something near the fence line with a tape measure. She noticed me watching and quickly ducked back into her house. 2 days later, a man in a suit showed up on our doorstep. Said he was representing Linda and wanted to offer an amicable resolution. His proposal? We keep the garden. She keeps the fence. No apology. No damages. Just an agreement to coexist peacefully. Claire didn't even let me finish reading it out loud. She walked to the shredder and fed the letter through without a word. And honestly, that moment said more than any court order ever could. Because we weren't the same people we'd been 3 months ago. We were stronger now. Sharper. United. And Linda? Linda was starting to realize the storm she'd invited into her life. It's strange how revenge doesn't feel like fire. It feels like focus. Cold, clear, surgical. I used to think people plotted revenge in a fit of rage, slamming doors and clenching fists. But when I reached that point, when I passed through the fire of betrayal and loss and hit that rare clarity on the other side, I realized it wasn't about payback for the sake of it. It was about taking back control. About reclaiming something stolen from us. About telling someone who thought she could bulldoze our lives that no, she didn't win. She just woke up the wrong neighbor. The county hearing was approaching fast, and with every passing day, Linda grew quieter, but more erratic. She'd peer through her blinds constantly, sometimes pacing her backyard like she was guarding it. Her dog barked less. Her guests stopped visiting. She'd gotten the notice too. She knew this was coming, but she didn't know how much I'd prepared. By the time the hearing was set, I had assembled a full arsenal. Not just the evidence you'd expect, like the old survey and the letter she ignored, but layers of backup, timestamps, maps, even aerial satellite screenshots showing the fence line before and after her construction. I had filed formal witness statements from 2 neighbors who'd lived here for over 20 years and confirmed the original boundary had never been disputed until Linda showed up. I had footage of her vandalizing the rose bushes. Photos of her using our yard space as if it were hers. A signed affidavit from the previous owner. And, perhaps most importantly, I had documentation from the county planner herself, stating that Linda never completed the final mandatory step in her permit process. She never submitted the signed acceptance form required after the review period to officially confirm her changes. She built the fence before the county had a chance to finalize it. That one mistake was all it took to make the whole thing crumble. But before the hearing, I wanted to tighten the noose. The legal aid attorney, Marcus, helped me file a temporary injunction to halt further construction. So that gazebo? It never even broke ground. A county inspector came by to check the permit status and was visibly annoyed when he saw the fence. This should have never gone up, he muttered. He didn't say more, but he took notes and photos. The day after that, I received a call from a reporter at a small local paper. Apparently someone, probably one of our friendly neighbors, had tipped them off about a property dispute gone haywire. They were interested in doing a feature. Claire wasn't sure. Do we really want to go public with this? she asked, curling up next to me on the couch. I thought about it for a while. No, I said. We want her to think we might. So I agreed to speak to the reporter, off the record. I gave just enough to confirm that there was a hearing coming and that county violations were involved. The next week, a short article appeared in the community section with the headline, "When Fences Make Enemies. Backyard Dispute Shakes Quiet Neighborhood." No names were mentioned, but the photo of our street made it pretty clear who it was about. Linda's car didn't move for 3 days after that. Not once. Meanwhile, I was moving with purpose. I asked Marcus if we could calculate damages, not just legal fees, but property value depreciation, loss of use of land, and destruction of garden assets. He put together a formal breakdown. It came out to $218,000 in projected damages, factoring in the long-term cost of removing the illegal structure and restoring the property. When I saw the number, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not because of the money, but because I finally saw the shape of the endgame. And just to twist the knife a little more, I submitted that estimate as part of our pre-hearing brief. It would be attached to the official file, a public document. Anyone could read it. The next morning, we found a note in our mailbox. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper with thick, cursive handwriting. There's no need to escalate this further. Let's be neighborly and come to a reasonable compromise. It wasn't signed, but the perfume on the paper gave her away. Linda wore this overpowering lilac scent that clung to everything like smoke. I didn't respond. Instead, I visited the HOA. Now, I'd avoided getting them involved up to that point because our HOA was usually more concerned with mailbox colors and grass length than legal boundaries. But I figured it was time to let them know what kind of precedent this could set. I sat down with the HOA president, a no-nonsense woman named Carol who had lived here for 35 years, and walked her through everything, quietly, calmly, with all the documents laid out. Carol was furious. "Do you know how many complaints we've gotten about her dog alone?" she said, flipping through the photos. This is the last straw." She promised to attend the hearing, not just as a neighbor, but as an official HOA representative. That meant more weight, more scrutiny. I also reached out to our local councilman. I didn't expect a personal reply, but his office responded and confirmed they'd flagged the issue for review, especially because of the permitting irregularities. If anything, that would help push the county into taking it more seriously. The final piece of the setup, though, wasn't legal or political. It was emotional. One evening, just a week before the hearing, I printed out the old photos we'd taken of our garden. Full bloom. Sunlight drenching the tomato patch. Claire kneeling in the dirt, smiling over her shoulder, her hands covered in soil. I framed it and left it on the living room table. When Claire saw it, she didn't say anything. She just stood there for a long time, then whispered, "We're getting it back, aren't we?" "We are," I said, because by that point, I wasn't just doing this to win. I was doing it to rebuild what she'd lost. The morning of the hearing, I woke up early. Claire made coffee. We sat in silence, sipping slowly, and then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. But the truth was, I'd never felt more ready for anything in my life. The hearing was set in a conference room at the municipal center. Rows of folding chairs. A panel of 3 planning commission members at the front. Linda showed up 10 minutes late, wearing all beige like she wanted to disappear into the walls. Her lawyer was with her, a tall, tired-looking man who kept glancing at his watch. Claire and I sat in the front row. Marcus sat beside me, organized and unreadable. When the clerk called our case, the air in the room shifted. And as I stepped up to speak, papers in hand, heart pounding, I knew something deep in my bones. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice, dressed in the clothes of calm, methodical preparation. And I was ready to deliver it. The hearing started like most bureaucratic things do, slow, stiff, and overly polite. But under the fluorescent lighting and the dry legal jargon, I could feel the current turning in our favor before I even opened my mouth. The lead commissioner, a man in his 60s named Mr. Hallstrom, adjusted his glasses and began reading through the packet we'd submitted. He paused at the damage assessment. His eyebrows rose. Then he flipped to the stills from the video footage, Linda in high definition, pruning our rose bushes like she was doing us a favor. He lingered there for a good 20 seconds. Linda's attorney tried to regain control first. He stood, cleared his throat, and began with the usual legalese. My client acted in good faith, based on a professional survey. Any errors in procedure were minor and unintentional. She was under the impression the property lines were in dispute and sought to improve what she reasonably believed to be her yard. He went on like that for a while, playing the confused homeowner card. At one point, he even tossed out the word miscommunication as if Linda hadn't personally torn out garden beds and strung up party lights on land that didn't belong to her. But Marcus, my attorney, had one rule for this day: stay calm. Stick to the evidence. Let her bury herself. And she did. When they gave us the floor, Marcus started with a concise, calm walkthrough of every misstep Linda had made. He referenced exact code violations, presented the signed letter she'd received and ignored, laid out the timeline like a trail of breadcrumbs. With every new exhibit, we saw the commissioners' faces shift from neutral to unsettled to visibly annoyed. Then he played the video. No one spoke as the footage showed Linda crossing the fence line at 11:43 p.m., shears in hand, cutting down the roses Claire had planted during our first year in the house. You could hear the quiet snip of the clippers. See the satisfied little smirk on her face as she picked up a blossom and tossed it aside. Mr. Hallstrom didn't even try to hide his expression. He leaned forward slightly and said, "Mrs. Carter, is that you in the footage?" Linda didn't answer at first. Her lawyer nudged her, but she kept her arms crossed, staring straight ahead. Eventually she mumbled, "Yes." That was all she said. One word. The woman who'd built a fence through our lives was suddenly mute. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. Next came the neighbor testimonies. Mr. Langford, a retired architect 2 doors down, stated firmly that the property line had always followed the apple trees. Then came Carol, the HOA president, who dropped the hammer. If this kind of behavior is allowed to stand, you'll have copycats throughout the neighborhood. It undermines decades of peaceful co-living. And frankly, it's embarrassing to the community. After that, Mr. Hallstrom called a brief recess. Linda didn't look at us. Her lawyer whispered to her, gesturing with his hands in frustration. She nodded once, but she looked pale, smaller somehow. When we returned to the room, the commission gave their findings. They were swift and decisive. Linda had violated county building codes by initiating construction before finalizing her permit. She had ignored a formal warning letter. She had failed to properly notify adjacent property owners of the proposed changes. She had entered and damaged property that was not hers, repeatedly, and her own surveyor, when contacted for clarification, admitted he had not cross-checked against the official municipal records. The county rescinded her construction permit in full. The fence was ordered to be removed within 30 days. If she failed to comply, the county would have it removed at her expense. The commission further referred the case for civil proceedings on the matter of damages, and while they couldn't issue a judgment themselves, they formally supported our request for recovery of legal fees and property damage costs totaling $218,000. But the final blow came with the administrative penalty. Because Linda had ignored a county stop work warning and submitted false boundary claims, she was fined an additional $17,500 in county violations, non-negotiable. When the decision was read aloud, I glanced at Linda. She wasn't smirking anymore. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they'd gone white, and her eyes had welled up with tears she refused to let fall. Her lawyer just stared at the floor, defeated. After the hearing, I walked out into the parking lot with Claire, both of us blinking in the daylight like we hadn't seen it in weeks. We didn't speak at first. It was too much, too big. Then Claire let out a laugh. A full, raw, relieved laugh that turned into tears halfway through. "They're making her tear it down," she whispered. "The whole fence. Every stupid board." I nodded. "And pay for all of it." For the first time in months, the weight on my chest was gone. The fallout was swift. Within a week, we received a letter from Linda's attorney offering to settle out of court and avoid prolonged litigation. The proposal included a full reimbursement of our legal costs, payment for landscaping repairs, and a gesture of goodwill in the amount of $60,000 if we dropped the pursuit of the remaining damages. We declined. By that point, Marcus had already filed the civil suit, backed by the county's findings and 3 signed affidavits from our neighbors. We didn't just want money. We wanted it on record, permanent, undisputable. A month later, Linda's fence was gone. She didn't take it down herself, of course. The county sent a work crew, billed her directly. and left a bare scar in the lawn where her petty little empire had once stood. Her gazebo dreams were over. Claire planted new rose bushes the same week. Linda eventually sold the house 6 months later. She didn't say goodbye. No more parties. No more barking dog. No more smugness. The new owners? A young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. They brought over homemade banana bread their first week and asked if we liked zucchini, because they wanted to start a garden and had extra seeds. I looked at the backyard from our porch, saw Claire out there planting again, kneeling in the dirt, humming softly under her breath. It wasn't just land. It never was. It was peace. It was home. And we got it back. Because Linda thought we'd roll over. She thought a fence would keep us out. But all she did was build herself a box and hand us the hammer. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet sound of a fence being torn down, one board at a time.